It looks like we're live on Facebook. Thank you so much for joining us, to anybody who's watching. And I'm Jennifer Beuthin. I'm really excited to be here today with my brother, Fabrizio Sasso. Do you want to just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself for those people who are unfortunate not to know you yet?
Yeah, I'm Fabrizio Sasso. I am the executive director of the Sacramento Central Labor Council in Sacramento, California. I am a Capricorn. I like long walks on the beach, and I fight for working people.
It's so good to see you, brother. We have been doing these Facebook Lives for a little while now, and every time another year of the NLLI comes on, there's a little conversation about how their year was the best year. But Fabrizio and I were both in NLLI season 4, and it's so good to see my brother from season 4.
Yeah, season 4 is the best. Everyone knows that. In fact, there's a lot of theories about like TV shows always reach their peak, like really great TV shows reach their peak in season 4. It's when all the writing and the characters are developed, all the writing kind of gels together. So yeah, season 4.
Excellent. So how are you doing? Sacramento is an interesting place, just like the rest of the country right now. And
it's been interesting. As I'm sure it is for everyone across the country, but Sacramento being the state capital, and kind of it's in the valley, so it's not San Francisco or LA. It's not a big city like that, but it's a big city for the valley. So it's got this like Midwestern feel to it. And I say it's the coolest city in California. If it'd be the coolest city in California if it weren't in California, right? So it's pretty cool. But yeah, I mean, we've with recently with the Black Lives Matter protests, we've had our city government shut everything down, curfew, and the National Guard came in. Really weird to see the militarization of our police force and the occupation of the military of like our city hall and courthouses and things like that. And then on top of all that, you've got COVID. You have people protesting to open up business and the economy, which we've been fighting, with the cities and the counties in our territory about. And so it's just weird because, and then we're doing a lot of this also virtually, and we're not seeing people in person, which kind of plays well to my personality. Despite what people who know me probably think, I'm an omnivert, but I'm more of an introvert, so I'm more comfortable being isolated. So I've thrived under COVID conditions, and I know that doesn't sound right, but I have. Yeah. So I've been able to get more work done as a result. But then seeing all of these different things that are happening where you need to be present and in front of people, I feel like sometimes we are not using our influence and our power to the extent that it needs to be at the moment. So it makes it very difficult for us to do that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, let's talk about that wide gamut of sort of flashpoints that you laid out, starting with kind of the beginning of COVID, because you and I spoke right after the COVID crisis began, and you told this really fascinating story, I thought, about your first steps in that moment and what you felt like was different in that moment than in normal times. Maybe you could talk about that and kind of what things look like on that trajectory first.
Yeah. So I think in normal times, everything that we fight for usually is a struggle, right? Power concedes nothing without struggle, and so we fought for eviction moratoriums and rent control in the city of Sacramento and throughout the state for a very long time, and it was very, very difficult, very expensive for us to do so. And had a lot of resistance, not just from like the usual, business folks, the realtor folks, but they're bought and paid for elected officials. However, during this crisis, never let a good crisis go to waste. I saw an opportunity to kind of play to the needs of the moment and like the chaos that was created around the initial closing down of everything, and reached out to our mayor and our county reps and asked for eviction moratorium. And without any hesitation or resistance, they said yes. And it was the easiest yes I've ever received. And I thought, well, you know what? Why don't we also say we're partnering on helping workers with an unemployment insurance helpline? And they said yes to that, um, and they're investing in that now. Which ultimately, my goal was, including that, is to get the city um, to create an enforcement labor code enforcement division out of the city department, which we just dropped language today. So we're creating a whole new department at the city. And we're going to be doing it at the county and then the surrounding counties afterwards. So we don't have that here. Big cities do, but we're finally doing it here.
But yeah, what's so incredible, I think, about this moment is, especially being in California, a lot of people seem to, from elsewhere in the country where, the politicians who are elected there are so much more overtly anti-labor. They think, oh, California is great because you've got people who are aligned with you, who will, listen when there's an issue with workers. And in reality, I think everything still here is a struggle. Maybe there aren't, I came up in Orange County where we did have overt attacks, every day, actively trying to take away our rights. But even in broader California, where politicians are, sort of more philosophically aligned with workers, you still have to fight to get more than, a photo op or a precinct walk or, somebody appearing on the picket line. And like Tracy Porter talked about this during one of our other Facebook Live interviews around that same struggle with race and police. And it's one thing to have people kneel and be aligned and say, we like you and we're with you. And it's another to like, give us your budgets and give us your power. And what I think is so powerful about that story you just told is that when they do loosen up, when you do say yes, and let workers have a seat at the table, it's better for everybody. Here now you've been able to create an enforcement arm that didn't exist before, and that improves the lives of everybody in the community. Right. So it's not like, unions are these boogeymen who are trying to like take power away from for some nefarious purposes. We're here for people, for the right, for working people, and right. That lifts up everybody. So
it's interesting that like the struggle exists because there is way too much influence of the special interest groups, the business groups over our elected officials during normal times. What's interesting is that the elected officials know what the right thing to do is during a crisis, and that's a good thing, right? Because a lot of them don't. At least here, the ones that I'm working with, understood that and didn't hesitate at all. So, in crisis, we try to capture as much as we can. I've been telling folks now's the time for us to capture as much socialism as we possibly can. And then fight like hell to have them take it away from us. Yeah. And so, and then I think about like the difficulties that we have with, say, our supposed friends in the Democratic Party, and especially those mod Dems who really cater to the masters of society who seek economic oppression and domination over all of us, right? Mm-hmm. Those folks that they listen to, and like how we are really trying to change the hearts and minds of folks. But even we have struggles with our progressive left. In fact, in the last 24 hours, I've been fighting with a group of really progressive elected officials who we've worked really damn hard to get elected, who have inserted anti-union rhetoric in a pledge that they made. And they weren't aware of it being anti-union, mm-hmm. And having to point it out and help them understand, like, these if you change out the words law enforcement unions to teachers unions, really you're saying that you wouldn't take contributions. The issue is taking contributions from police unions, which it's kind of a controversial subject, I think, within the labor movement, but one worth us talking about as leaders. But the point is that the language that they use is language that you hear from our the from the right, and from the Koch brothers and from right to work supporters, which is very dangerous, I think, for the labor movement. We have to be aware of that, which means like we have to also find our role in what is happening right now.
Yeah, maybe you can talk a little bit about that too. Because I'll say, like, when I read about the elected officials taking a pledge against taking police union money, I was like, yep, let's do this. And at the same time, I think, I remember years ago, there was an issue that came up around making public employee records public, if somebody was disciplined.
And they're still trying to do that now.
With certain classifications, and then they wanted to move it to everybody else. And so I remember standing up against that. So, it is, and you're in a really unique position as the head of a labor council who represents such a wide, swath of workers and working people. And you're also a strong progressive voice in Sacramento, and an unapologetic progressive voice. So how are you navigating that as a leader in this moment, both through COVID and thinking about the workers from that perspective, and also thinking about there's so many Black workers who have to go to work every day and worry about being killed. Like, how are you navigating that?
I think just to be honest, you take it issue by issue, and it's very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
It's challenging. It's really challenging. What we're trying to do as a labor council in protecting workers during COVID is to establish the rules for reopening the economy at the city and county levels. In terms of the protesting, the Black Lives Matter movement, what is our role as a labor council in that? And I've been out to the protests from the very first day. I've been shot at, but with rubber bullets, and been tear gassed myself, and and I've seen the level of peacefulness of the protests, and I've seen the other stuff as well, and just knowing that I'm out there, but I'm not out there as the labor council, and the labor council hasn't organized anything, and I'm trying to be really sensitive about making sure that labor has a bad reputation of coming in and taking over things, right? And making it about themselves, and we cannot, as labor, we should be supportive and provide resources and do what we can to be a good ally and partner in the movement, but we cannot have ourselves be centered in this movement, right? It belongs to our members who are a part of the communities that are facing these atrocities by the police, the brutality by the police departments, and we need to support them. And so just really trying to figure out how we are engaging in a way where it's not like, hey, we're labor, here, look at us, here's our banner, and we're going to put it right there front and center, we're going to show everybody, and we got to do more than that. We've got to be great allies in this movement. And so I'm trying to figure it out, and I struggle with that, and I know other leaders struggle with it as well. And the more conversations we have, the more we begin to determine a plan. And I think now is the time for the labor movement really to step up as we begin to see more discussions about reform and systemic change. We're starting to see the momentum slide, starting to dip in terms of the actual action, the events, the marches, the protests, which is kind of concerns me in that I think, folks, there was a point of critical mass for us here, at least in Sacramento, last Saturday, when finally the elected officials and all the white folks showed up to march, in the streets. And it's like, okay, now it's accepted, it's trending, It's okay for us to join. It's not as scary as we thought it was. And that's a great thing for the movement, right? Because there's an acceptance of what they've been saying. There's an understanding, and we've moved the dial. But it's not just a one-day event. It's got to be sustained, and those voices need to continue to lend their support beyond that one day of protest.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning, like, you got to show up to City Hall and ask for police reform. You got to end, systemic racism in the education of our students, right? So, like, all in the different elements of society that where racism exists,
Mm-hmm.
people need to start showing up. So I'm just afraid that with the momentum dwindling, that there's going to be a lot of watering down of what the demands are, and what ultimately gets passed and changed. And ultimately, I think, if it is to a certain extent, then nothing really changes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so here's here's the opportunity for labor to step up and provide that support. Um, and that's what we're trying to figure out right now.
Yeah.
And it's rambling. I'm rambling here, but
No, no. And what I'm hearing you talk about is, we spent a lot of time, I think, in week 2 of the NLLI talking about institutions and movements, and how, movements are messy and they're uncomfortable and they need to be. And institutions can play a role, and also sometimes they need to be changed and dismantled. And those are uncomfortable conversations too. We're sort of nearing the closing time. These things always go so much faster than we want them to. But I wonder if there's anything you can think of or want to talk about that you're particularly drawing on from your experience in the NLLI, and also anything you want to say to your brothers and sisters who've been through this with you, and who are, on the front lines as well.
Yeah. So I draw upon systems change. A
Mm-hmm.
lot about systems change. Systems are static. They resist change. They, usually if you change a system, it's replaced by something just as equally bad. And, real system change dives into the root of the problem. And that's something that I've been thinking about a lot. The root of the problem, and it goes back to our messaging, and or like labor's messaging in general about economic justice, right? You can't have social justice without economic justice. I think that's really where it begins. And you look at the history of this country and how it was founded upon slavery, and it's economically driven, right? The economic oppression and the division of the poor. Whether it's in slavery, and you had the hierarchy of you have your folks in the house, you have them out in the field, then you have the white slave drivers who were still poor white folks, and then you have like the slave master. That is a system that is economically driven, and racism is used as a tactic in order for it to be successful.
Mm-hmm.
To this very day, of course, all of that still exists. It just exists in different forms. You go to any restaurant and you look at who's at the back of the house and who's at the front of the house, and how we're still dividing folks, right? Mm-hmm. And even though it's probably not done intentionally, it's inherited. Those like business needs to understand like their contribution to propping up systemic racism. Yeah. And so our message has always been about equality on the job, and and then we've always fought for civil rights and racial justice, and all those other great things that we do in labor. And it's like we got to continue to drill our message and help people understand, what is driving all of this, getting down to the root, the systems change. What is driving all of this, and what is it that we need to do to actually change it? And it's so pervasive in every element of society that it seems overwhelming. But if we can start with police reform, it's one area, and we can start in all these other areas. We could move on to all these other areas as well. As far as my friends in NLLI, I miss y'all, and Josh.
Josh is on here, so is Phil Glover, and Fabrizio. Thank you. It's so good to see you, brother. Appreciate your time and thank you for all you're doing.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Bye.